So, good morning. Welcome to another session of plant modeling 2. In today's lecture, we will be moving on to the third module that deals with leaf scale water relationship. So, till now, we were focusing on photosynthesis, the process called photosynthesis. In leaf scale water relationship, we'll be going more into the how various processes like transpiration and a process called stomatal conductance, two different processes are happening and how is it related to photosynthesis.
So, gas exchange in plants. Before we talk about leaf scale water relationship, uh, water, water is when we talk about leaf water relationship, the relationship of water leaving the leaf is what we are talking about. Now, roots are going to take up water from the soil and they are going to get transported into the leaf by the vascular bundles. And this water is going to leave the leaf from the same pores called stomata that are being used to take in carbon dioxide. So during this process, basically what is happening is there is an exchange of carbon dioxide between the atmosphere and within inside the leaf. There is an exchange of water in the form of water vapor between the leaf and the atmosphere. And at the same time, there is an exchange of oxygen also. As a result of photosynthesis, oxygen is again released back into the atmosphere. So three types of gas exchange is happening with the help of these pores called stomata. So in case of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is entering the stomata from the atmosphere. In case of oxygen, it is leaving the leaf through the stomata back into the atmosphere. And in case of water also in the form of water vapor is released back into the atmosphere from the leaf. So how does this, if you consider one stomata, how do you how does this stomata handle all the exchange, keep a balance between all the exchange? Because sometimes carbon dioxide is entering, sometimes oxygen is releasing, sometimes water vapor is releasing, and all of these are controlled processes by the plant. The plant is not randomly leaving out oxygen or randomly leaving out water from the stomata. It is a controlled process depending on the requirement of the plant, depending upon various factors of the plant is which factors of the plants required by the plant governs this gas exchange that is happening. And this gas exchange is one of the major processes. The exchange of gases between the leaf and the atmosphere is one of the major processes that plays a huge role in the productivity of the plant. So we studied about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis results in the formation of in the manufacture of carbohydrates. So the plant produce basically in the form of biomass in leaves or biomass of stem or biomass of roots. All of it highly depends on the uh, photosynthesis process, which is a part of the gas exchange in plants. And again, it plays a crucial role in determining the water use efficiency. So, what is water use efficiency? Is basically how efficiently water is being used by the plant in generating carbon. So, the definition of water use efficiency differs in various aspects. I'll go to that part of that. I'll explain what is water use efficiency in the coming classes. Right now, let's just familiarize with this term, which is water use efficiency. And then the plant adaptation to the environment in which it is surviving or existing is also hugely dependent or hugely influenced by this gas exchange process. So carbon dioxide uptake is happening through the stomata. Carbon dioxide is basically diffusing into the plant through these tiny pores called stomata. And we know about the photosynthesis process. Carbon dioxide is going to enter the mesophyll cells, and then in the it goes into the palisade cells, the chloroplast. Inside the chloroplast, the thylakoid membrane, it is fixed through this through this process of Calvin cycle. So carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is thus being utilized in the chloroplasts of these leaves, and the rate of photosynthesis is again going to depend on what is the concentration of carbon dioxide within this leaf space. The spongy mesophyll cells is where you will find carbon dioxide circulating for this process. So the concentration of carbon dioxide is going to play a huge role. Then the most important or another very important factor that affects the rate of photosynthesis is something called stomatal conductance. That is the ease with which carbon dioxide will enter the stomata. How easily can carbon dioxide enter stomata is called stomatal conductance. And of course, other factors like the availability of light, the concentration of the rubiscose enzymatic activity, the rate of electron transport rate, the rate of triose phosphate utilization, all of these factors are affecting photosynthesis. But one of the most important processes that we have not discussed until now with respect to photosynthesis is this process called stomatal conductance. So stomatal conductance is the most initial process that is allowing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to enter the leaf through these tiny pores called stomata, and the ease with which it enters is determined by this physiological process called stomatal conductance. Now, we talked about during photosynthesis, the process of carbon dioxide is taken in. So, that kind of a gas exchange is happening between the atmosphere and the leaf. And at the same time, oxygen is also being released out. So, that happens as a result of, as since it is also a byproduct of the photosynthesis process. Now, another totally different process that involves gas exchange is the exchange of water vapor between the atmosphere and the leaf. So this process is called transpiration, where water is not taken in by the leaves, it is lost from the stomata, that is from the inside of the leaf. Water vapor is going out into the atmosphere through this tiny pores called stomata, and this process is called transpiration. Now, why transpiration? It has got a lot of functions as to maintaining the temperature of the plant. So, when transpiration occurs, that is when which is basically something similar to evaporation. When water is getting evaporated from a surface, what happens is this evaporation process is going to cool down the surface. So, similarly, in plants, this evaporative loss of water is called transpiration, and this transpiration process is helping in maintaining the temperature of the plant. Now, not only that, the nutrient transport is happening as a result of water being taken up from the roots to the different parts of the plant, and this process of transpiration, which is dependent on the vapor pressure deficit, which I'll explain later on. It is a driving force for this transpiration process. Vapor pressure deficit is nothing but the difference in the vapor pressure inside the leaf and outside the leaf, that is in the atmosphere. So this difference is what is driving or helping the water to reach the leaves and move out. So this is also helping in the transportation of water from the roots to the this is also one of the processes that helps drive the water movement from the roots to the different parts of the plant, particularly to the leaves. And during this, nutrient transport is also occurring. And then it is helping in maintaining the turgor pressure, which is basically keeping cells hydrated. So turgor pressure is nothing but the pressure exerted by the cell wall and pushes it outside. So the cells are all filled with water, and then it is hydrated. So these are some broad benefits of transpiration. Now, this transpiration process is also one process that is dependent on stomatal conductance. Now, if you see here, it is through the same stomata that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is entering the leaf, and water vapor from inside the leaf is going out into the atmosphere. So, plants are Also, the transpiration process is also dependent on the stomatal conductance, which is going to impact the uh, water loss, or how much water is going out from the leaf into the atmosphere. Now, although carbon dioxide entry of carbon dioxide is a positive process helping in the manufacture in the process of photosynthesis, too much of transpiration is going to result in the plant losing a lot of water. So, in order to maintain an optimum amount of water being lost, the stomata will generally close so that too much water is not lost during transpiration. So, again, now suppose the stomata is open and the photosynthetic rate occurring is really high. So, at the same time, this water will also be going out at a very high rate. So what the stomata has to do is it has to control the opening of it so that there is a balance between this carbon dioxide that is entering and the water loss that is happening through the stomata. So if you see this video here, this is an example of the the stomata closing and opening, and what is happening, what is actually causing the opening and closing of the stomata. So if you when you see there are some black and blue particles that are going out from this guard cells of the stomata that is surrounding the stomata, and also these things going inside the guard cells during which this stomata opens. So when these small particles, which are representative of potassium ions, when they leave when they enter the guard cells, the stomata opens, and when you see that when they are leaving the guard cells, the stomata is closing. This is nothing but this process is nothing but what is um, what is called as the opening and closing of stomata is determined by the water potential within these cells. So water potential is nothing but what is the energy of the water at a particular place. Now, if you see here, we see that when these black particles are entering this guard cells, these black particles are nothing but potassium ions. When they enter the guard cells, the concentration of these black particles are more here. As a result of it, water which is available here is less. So because of that, since water travels from a high concentration region to a low concentration region, when the osmotic potential, which is the energy that is resulting as the presence of high concentration of potassium ions within this guard cell, because of the high osmotic potential, water is going to be transported from outside of these guard cells to the inside of these guard cells. So this is the reason why the stomata opens. Now what happens when the water potential reduces? When the water potential reduces, that is the water in here reduces, this region reduces, the concentration of water is going to be high here. So this water will have the tendency to exit these guard cells and travel back to the outside of the guard cells, during which it is going to the pressure on these sides of this guard cells wall is going to reduce, and then the stomata is going to close. So it is going to pull the walls inside. As a result of which, the stomata is going to close. So the force with when water enters the guard cells, this water is going to push the cell linings of this guard cells, which is resulting in the opening of the stomata. And in the same way, when the water is leaving the guard cells, the cell walls are going to then the push, I mean the turgidity that is existing in within the guard cell is going to reduce, and the walls are going to shrink, which is going to shrink the guard cells, and as a result of which it is also going to close the stomata. So this is the process which is dependent on the water potential existing in the leaf, that is going to dictate how the whether the guard cells open or close. So it is not just dependent on photosynthesis. Now, if a plant's photosynthesis is high, it does not mean that the stomata is open. It also means that the potential, the leaf water potential is such that the stomata is opening and closing in response to the water potential of the water potential within the leaf. As a response to the response to this water potential is also controlling the opening and closing of the stomata. It is one of the major processes that is governing the opening and the closing of the stomata. Now, like I said, this stomata, the water is going, the carbon dioxide is going to enter. It is going to circulate within these regions of the mesophyll cells, and then water also from the vascular bundle is going to exit through the stomata. Now, how does the rate of photosynthesis affect the gas exchange in plants? So rate of photosynthesis is also something that influences the opening and closing of stomata. Say, for a particular rate of photosynthesis, the stomatal conductance, or the opening of stomata is going to be at a certain degree. Now, as the rate of photosynthesis increases, it means rate of photosynthesis is high, means that the carbon dioxide demand is high, because of which the stomata is going to be open so that the carbon dioxide demand can be fulfilled. But when the stomata opens for such a long time, water is also going to go out of it. And as a result of it, water loss is going to happen. Then, in order to reduce the water loss, the stomata will start closing. So, which process has to be given importance by the stomata is something that is governed by the stomatal conductance. That is, opening and closing of stomata is controlled in such a way that there is a balance between the carbon dioxide entering and water exiting through the same stomata. So by definition, stomatal conductance, which is represented by Gs in most of the equations and modeling, is the rate of carbon dioxide that is entering or water that is exiting through the stomata of leaves, as determined by the degree of the aperture of the stomata, and also the response to the physical resistance that is offered to the carbon dioxide and water vapor from the interior of the leaf to the atmosphere. So from here you can see, in simple terms, this is the process that is happening. Carbon dioxide is entering, water is exiting. Now you can see here two terms called Ca and Ci. Ci, we know very well what it represents. It is the intercellular carbon dioxide concentration within the leaf. And Ca is the carbon dioxide concentration outside the leaf. That is basically atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. And in case of water, this VPA indicates the vapor pressure of water in the atmosphere, and VPI indicates the vapor pressure of water within the leaves. Now, I said carbon dioxide, I said when there is when the driving force for transpiration is the vapor pressure deficit. So, vapor pressure deficit is nothing but it is the difference between this two vapor pressures. And carbon dioxide concentration gradient is another factor that determines the entry of carbon dioxide into the leaves, and that gradient is given by the difference of this carbon dioxide concentration here and the carbon dioxide concentration inside the leaf. So so it will be like Ca minus Ci will be the gradient that is affecting the carbon dioxide concentration, and Vpi minus Vpa will be the vapor pressure deficit. Vapor pressure deficit that is governing the uh, exit of water from the leaf. Now, why did I put Ca here first and Ci here first? So Ca is the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. So whatever is the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration, if it is say equal to 400, and the carbon dioxide concentration is equal to something like 20 over here, then the carbon dioxide is going to move from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. So in general, if this concentration gradient, it won't reach up to this level and all. So in case it reaches that level, the stomata is going to close and there is no carbon dioxide going to enter. Same is the condition of the water vapor. But in the case of the water vapor loss, this vapor pressure inside the leaf is always going to be the highest. That is, it is going to be the saturated vapor pressure. That is, inside the leaf, it is always considered that the leaf is fully filled with water and there is no more space for water to enter. So that is why the water is leaving from here to here, because this place is full of water, and here the pressure of water vapor, it is less over here. So that is why water is always traveling from inside the leaf to outside. The other way around doesn't happen. So that is because inside the leaf it is always going to be saturated, and there is no accessibility for water to enter the leaf from the stomata, because it is always going to be saturated with water, and always the water vapor is going to be less than what is there inside the leaf in the atmosphere. So these two gradients or deficit is the carbon dioxide concentration gradient, and the vapor pressure deficit is what is controlling the movement of carbon dioxide inside and movement of water vapor outside the leaf respectively. Now, the stomatal conductance is affected by a lot of factors. For example, environmental factors like we just now learned, the concentration of carbon dioxide outside the leaf, the vapor pressure of water outside the leaf, and temperature of the temperature that the leaf is being exposed to, light conditions the leaf is being exposed to. All of these in environmental factors influence the stomatal conductance. Then there are also particular hormone distress signs from the plant, like this abscisic acid, which is uh, which is generated when there is some stress in when there is drought stress in water. That is, there is no enough water available for the plant, then certain hormones are produced, and this is also impacting stomatal. So when this hormone is high, the stomata knows that what the plant is going through some water stress condition. There is no enough water for the plant to transpire and lose. So in such conditions, the stomatal conductance are also impacted. And again, uh, just like how those hormones are produced as a result of drought stress, the soil moisture content. So if the water in the soil is not enough, the roots of the plant cannot take much of water. So this is in total going to reduce the water potential in the leaves, because um, the gradient of the concentration of water within the plant and in the soil is going to be different, such that the plant is not going to have the energy to take up water from the plants from the soil. So that is going to reduce the water potential. Like I said, is going to control the water entering and exiting the guard cells in the stomata, and that again is going to impact stomatal conductance. So what we will be looking in detail is this environmental factor called humidity first, and then eventually we'll go to the next factors. So earlier, I had talked about the concentration gradient here and vapor pressure over here. Now, what we are going to focus on is this vapor pressure deficit. So, transpiration rate is given in this form. So, transpiration is a product of the stomatal conductance and the vapor pressure deficit. So, if the transpiration is high, we can either say that VPD is high. VPD is nothing but VPA minus VPI, and yeah, VPA minus VPI. Sorry, it is VPI minus VPA. Uh, the vapor pressure deficit into the stomatal conductance will give transpiration, and similarly assimilation. A for assimilation is also a product of the stomatal conductance and the concentration gradient of carbon dioxide between the leaf and the atmosphere. So if this part of the term is high, then transpiration will increase. Similarly, if this stomatal conductance is also high, transpiration will increase. Now, when the stomatal conductance is very high, the assimilation rate also will increase. But what is does that mean that the concentration gradient will change? No, because this whatever is the carbon dioxide concentration within in the atmosphere is going to be like that only. It is not going to change in response to this photosynthesis or stomatal conductance. This thing is going to be whatever was there in the atmosphere. So under such conditions, what happens is there will be difference in the stomatal conductance rate, so that this value is maintained. We can't change this value. We cannot change what is the concentration of carbon dioxide outside. So in such cases, the stomatal conductance will change, which is again going to decrease assimilation rate. So this is what the this connection between the stomatal conductance, transpiration, and assimilation is what we try to establish through various models. So in order to understand what this vapor pressure deficit is, what relative humidity is, first we have to we'll go into uh, that part of the that term specifically, and understand how to find out what is the relative humidity and what is the vapor pressure deficit, which will be required for calculations. So, like I said, the one of the most important factors influencing stomatal conductance is the vapor pressure deficit or the relative humidity. So, I'm using vapor pressure deficit. I'm also saying vapor pressure of water vapor in the atmosphere inside the leaf. I'm also saying relative humidity. So what is the relation between all of these terms is what we'll go through now. So basically, when water vapor is present in the air, it is called humidity. It's a general term, humidity. But what we are going to use are terms like relative humidity, absolute humidity, saturated vapor pressure, actual vapor pressure. These are the kinds of terms that we are going to use. So what are all these terms and how is it different from each other? So when you consider an amount of air, what is the actual amount of water vapor present in the air is called the absolute humidity. So any actual value is always referred to as absolute value. So similarly, whatever is the water vapor that is present in the air is called the absolute humidity. Now, it can be expressed in terms of humidity is usually the amount of water vapor present in the air can be expressed in terms of moles of water vapor present in moles of air, or it can be expressed in terms of pressure. That is, this is the vapor pressure. So it can be expressed in terms of Pascal. Then it can also be expressed in terms of grams of water per cubic meter cube of air, or grams of vapor per kilogram of air. So there are different ways to express the vapor present in the air. It can be expressed in terms of pressure. It can be expressed in terms of moles, the mole fraction we call it, the moles of water vapor per moles of air. It can be expressed in terms of gram per centimeter cube of air. It can be expressed in terms of gram per kilogram of air. So if you see any chart or any value that is associated with humidity in these four kinds of units, it gives the vapor the absolute humidity, or the actual vapor conditions in the air. Now that was absolute humidity. So what is relative humidity? Relative humidity, we talked about absolute humidity. Now air has a certain capacity to store the water vapor. So, say a particular volume of air, it is it is receiving water vapor from some source continuously, and after a point of time, that volume of air cannot take more than a certain quantity of water vapor. It gets saturated. So that quantity is called saturated vapor pressure or saturated vapor. Now, the ratio of the actual vapor pressure or the absolute humidity to the saturated vapor pressure or saturated humidity is called as relative humidity. So relative humidity, like how the name suggests, relative is a percentage quantity. It is a ratio quantity of what is the actual conditions in the air to what is the saturated condition in the air. Now, the relative humidity is a temperature dependent quantity. So at one particular temperature, the saturation limit of air will be one value. Say the temperature changes, the saturated limit of air at that particular temperature is also going to be different. It is not going to be the same as the saturated limit of air at a different temperature. So when we say that relative humidity, this is the relative humidity of air, even though we just say that the RH is this or RH is there, we have to be very particular as to mentioning at what temperature is the relative humidity, that value. Often, when we use it in equations or modeling, we don't generally mention the temperature, or we don't, when even when you talk about the weather in terms of its high humidity, the relative humidity is 80% or 70%. We don't mention that this relative humidity is corresponding to a particular temperature. It is not the same for every temperature. It changes for every temperature because the saturated vapor pressure or the saturated vapor state varies with temperature. So relative humidity is nothing but it is the actual humidity or the absolute humidity or the actual vapor pressure. So when I say I will be using mostly actual vapor pressure, but like I said, this vapor can be talked in terms of mole fraction, in terms of pressure, in terms of grams per meter cube, or in terms of grams per kilogram. So I will keep talking about it as vapor pressure because I don't want to keep saying four different names of the same quantity. So actual vapor pressure to saturated vapor pressure is what is relative humidity. The percentage of actual vapor pressure to saturated vapor pressure is relative humidity. So for estimations in plant physiology, we need to standardize the units. Generally, the vapor pressure quantities are going in, if you consider leaf and if you consider one stomata, I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong term, uh, stomata. I'm not very familiar with which is singular and which is plural. So for the ease of it, I'll say stomata. So for each stomata, when you say that this much is the concentration of carbon dioxide entering, the value is going to be very less. So we have to express in terms of moles. So that is why in plant physiology, this quantity is expressed in terms of mole fraction, millimoles of water per moles of air, or micromole. In carbon dioxide, we express it in terms of micromoles of carbon dioxide within this many moles of air. So it is always expressed in terms of mole fraction, whether it is vapor pressure or carbon dioxide concentration. So let's focus on vapor pressure now. But then when we consider atmospheric conditions, we don't usually talk about it in terms of mole fraction. We talk about it in terms of pressure or gram per kg or gram per centimeter cube or meter cube. Now, one important tool for us that helps us in estimating relative humidity or the actual vapor pressure or the saturated vapor pressure at a particular temperature is called the psychrometric chart. So using this chart, we can get what is the saturated vapor pressure at a particular temperature, what is the relative humidity at a particular temperature, what is the actual vapor pressure at a particular temperature. So it is nothing but like you see in this graph over here, here in the y-axis, you can see vapor pressure, which is nothing but the actual the vapor pressure that I've been talking about. All these are coming in terms of vapor pressure. You see VPA, vapor pressure in the atmosphere, and vapor pressure in the inside the leaf. So that is why VP, VP over here. So this is some values of pressure that you have in the units of Pascal. And this x-axis has some values of temperature in units of degree Celsius. So, and then there are a bunch of curves also. How many of you are familiar with psychrometric charts? Okay, never mind. Okay. So you see that the x-axis has some temperature values, y-axis has some pressure values, and then there are some curved lines over here with percentages written on them. These percentages are the relative humidity. So relative humidity 10 percentage is represented by this curve. Relative humidity 20 percentage is represented by this curve, 30 percentage by this curve, 40, 50, and 100. Now, what is the relative okay, we'll come to that later. Okay, so these curved lines in this chart is giving us the relative humidity. X-axis is giving us the temperature. Y-axis is giving us the vapor pressure. Now, I did say that for a particular relative humidity at a particular temperature, relative humidity at a particular temperature is different. You can see at 24 all sorts of relative humidity. 24 degrees Celsius, there is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, all sorts of relative humidity is there. So if you see at 24 degrees Celsius, at 10 percentage relative humidity, if you trace the line back to this y-axis, we see that the pressure at 24 degrees Celsius and 10% relative humidity is something around 300 pascals. So this is how you read a psychrometric chart. Now this is a simple chart that is coming from this complicated psychrometric chart, which is a combination of so many lines and curves and straight lines and horizontal lines and everything. So it is important that we know how to read this chart in order to obtain values of actual vapor pressure, actual water absolute humidity, and saturated vapor pressure. Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is the psychrometric chart from where you're getting the humidity value. Just like this graph over here, you will see that these curved lines are nothing but relative humidity. 100%, 90% is all representing these curves over here. Then the x-axis is temperature, y-axis, which is given in the right side, unlike the previous graph, is the absolute humidity or the actual vapor pressure or the vapor pressure values. Now, there is also another quantity that is being described here called the wet bulb or the saturation temperature. So let's just get to know about all these quantities briefly. So dry bulb temperature is nothing but the normal air temperature that we can get from a thermometer. So if we have a thermometer, whatever temperature the thermometer gives us is called, what is the air temperature is called the dry bulb temperature, and that is what is there in the x-axis. So this bottom axis, they have very clearly written, read from the bottom upwards. And this line, this x-axis is representing the temperature. So at 50 degrees Celsius, this entire line is representing all the quantities that is corresponding to the 50 degrees Celsius. 45 degrees Celsius, this line is representing all the quantities that is corresponding to the 45 degrees Celsius. Now, similar to dry bulb temperature, there is something called the wet bulb temperature. And this is given by these diagonal lines. You see, the slanting lines over here are corresponding to some number. This is number is corresponding to the wet bulb temperature. Now, what is wet bulb temperature? So to understand this, we can take an example of, say, when you're sweating on a really hot day. and then you go suddenly and a blow of wind, uh, a breeze or something blows over your hand, you will feel cold. And that is because the water, the sweat on your skin is going to evaporate from there, and this is actually cooling, cooling your hand or cooling your skin. So when this water is evaporating, it removes the heat from your body, and as a result of which, the temperature is going to reduce. So the temperature which is a bit high, when this evaporation of water because of this blow of wind will remove the heat and reduce the temperature a bit. This lowest temperature, the cooling temperature it reaches, is called the wet bulb temperature. So whatever temperature reduction is happening as a result of this the evaporation is called the wet bulb temperature. So if you when in order to find the wet bulb temperature, we usually use a soaked cotton or a cloth and enclose the thermometer bulb on that, and then after some time we remove the thermometer and blow air on it, or we'll just swing it in the air. The temperature is going to reduce from one point to another point. That lower point is called the wet bulb temperature. Now, why is this wet bulb temperature important? Is it is reducing a temperature reduction is happening as a result of the evaporative effect. So some water is being evaporated, that is resulting in the reduction of temperature. So knowing that temperature will help us in understanding more about how much water is being evaporated. So this wet bulb uh, temperature is read from this graph in diagonal terms. The diagonal lines are what are representing the wet bulb temperature. Now, if the air is dry, what happens? The water is going to evaporate more quickly. So this is going to affect more cooling, and hence the wet bulb temperature is much lower than normal temperature. So at a particular temperature, if the air is dry, then what if there is a source of water over around, the evaporation of the water will happen more quickly, which is resulting in more cooling, and which is resulting in the wet bulb temperature to be much lower than a normal temperature. Same is the condition if air is humid. What happens is the evaporation that is occurring cannot happen a lot because already the air is filled with water vapor. So evaporation effect is going to be slow. So this is reducing the cooling effect, and because of this, the temperature is not going to reduce very high. It is not going to go to a very low level. It is remaining close to the normal temperature itself. So in such conditions, we say that the wet bulb temperature is high, that is closer to the normal temperature. Now, what happens at 100% humidity? Now, this condition was when the air is humid. The air became so humid that 100% humidity has been reached. There is no scope for any water to evaporate. In that case, the dry bulb temperature itself is going to be the wet bulb temperature, and that you can get very easily from this graph, which shows that at the dry bulb temperature, and if you see this relative humidity is 100 percentage, you see at this point you will find that the dry bulb temperature and the wet bulb temperature are both the same. So this is giving us a lot of information about the possibilities in terms of transpiration. If the humidity is high, we can say wet bulb temperature and the dry bulb temperature is the same, and we can find out what is the corresponding vapor pressure corresponding to it. So uh, if you okay, I'll come to that later on. Yeah, so if you trace this line back to this y-axis, you see that at 25 degrees Celsius, at relative humidity 100 percentage, the vapor pressure is going to be 20 grams per kilogram of dry air. So this is how this entire chart will help us in getting some values of actual vapor pressure, relative humidity, temperature, etc. So some examples that makes use of this wet bulb temperature is, again, we talked about the sweating process. Then in humid weather, if the air is already full of moisture, wet bulb sweat the evaporation is not going to take place. That is because the wet bulb temperature is not very low, it is high. It is equal to the dry bulb temperature. It is not reducing. That is why we say that it is high wet bulb temperature. And this is going to make you hotter. So even if the temperature is not very, say at a particular temperature, a particular day you might not feel as hot it is in as compared to a humid climate. That is because of this evaporation process that is not happening because of this high wet bulb temperature. Greenhouse farmers also frequently check this wet bulb temperature to understand plant cooling and irrigation requirement. Now, if you see in this graph, there is another thing called saturation temperature. Now, at wet bulb temperature, the relative humidity is 100%. More of evaporation cannot take place. So whatever, if more evaporation has to take place, what happens is whatever water vapor is present in the air has to cool down, and this cooling down, when the temperature, the maximum amount of water vapor which is there in the atmosphere without condensation happening is called the saturation temperature. So wet bulb temperature at 100% relative humidity is called the saturation temperature. Because beyond this temperature, beyond at this temperature, if water vapor starts going added to the air, what will happen is some existing water vapor will cool down, will condense, and convert from the vapor to the liquid phase. So that particular temperature which can hold the maximum amount of water vapor is called the saturation temperature. Now, if water vapor tends to evaporate beyond the saturation temperature, it will result in condensation. So the temperature at which the air becomes fully saturated with water vapor and condensation begins is called the dew point temperature. And relative humidity over here, they have said the curved lines are the ones that are showing how full the water is in the air. So if it is 0% RH, it means that the air is completely dry. There is no water vapor. 100% RH means the air is fully saturated with water vapor. So these are some terms that are there in the psychrometric chart. So this curved line in terms of humidity is 100% relative humidity, and as we go down, it is giving indications of various values of relative humidity. The y-axis is giving the values of absolute humidity. X-axis is giving the values of dry bulb temperature or normal air temperature, and this diagonal lines are giving wet bulb temperature, which is nothing but the temperature at which the temperature that is reduced as a result of the evaporative water loss. Now, this term called vapor pressure deficit, now we have become familiar with what vapor pressure deficit is. So, vapor pressure deficit is nothing but the difference between the vapor pressure inside the leaf, which is basically the saturated vapor pressure, and the vapor pressure outside the leaf. So, this vapor pressure deficit is what is driving this transpiration process. So, what does it mean when you say that the vapor pressure is very high? What does high VPD indicate? So when we say that VPD is high, we say it because this value is going to be high. Say if the vapor pressure is 25 and this is 15, and say the vapor pressure is 25 and the actual vapor pressure is 10. So 25 minus 15 is equal to 10, and 25 minus 10 is equal to 15. So we say this is the higher vapor pressure than this one. So when the vapor pressure deficit is high, it means that this actual vapor pressure is low. So VPA is low. So at high VPD, it means that the actual vapor pressure, whatever is the vapor pressure in the atmosphere, it is low. So if this value is going to be high, this value is going to be low. That is why the vapor pressure deficit will be high. Now, if this actual vapor pressure is low, what does it indicate, or what does it tell about the relative humidity? We know what is the actual vapor pressure. Say, take this example itself. This is the saturated vapor pressure. This is the actual vapor pressure. If the VPD is high, what does it tell about the relative humidity? What does it mean to, I need you to answer in the chat box, or you can switch on your mic and say, if the actual vapor pressure is low, what does it tell about the relative humidity? Yes, means that the air is dry. So if the air is dry, how will you talk about the relative humidity? What will you say if whether the air is humid or whether it is less humid or more humid? Yes. So the relative humidity is going to be low. RH is low. And this, if we don't want to do too much of thinking, we can say RH is equal to VPA by VPI. Since VPA is low, since RH is directly proportional to the VPA, RH also will be low. So as the actual vapor pressure keeps on increasing, the relative humidity also will keep on increasing. So when we say that the VPD is very high, it means that the opportunity or the transpiration rate is going to be very high, because we had talked about how transpiration is a function of the vapor pressure deficit, VPI minus VPA. So if the relative humidity, at low relative humidity, the transpiration is going to be very high. So what will be the stomatal conductance response to high transpiration rate? Will it close or will it keep the stomata more open? It will close. So as a response to low relative humidity. So when the dry air is very dry out in the atmosphere, the tendency of the stomata is to close. It is going to reduce, or the stomata is going to close, so that more of the transpiration does not happen. Now, if the stomata closes, what will happen to the carbon dioxide? The carbon dioxide will not enter. Now we know that A is equal to Gs into Ca by minus Ci. So at high VPD, Gs is going to be low. This will result in assimilation or photosynthetic rate also to become low. So what will happen? Photosynthetic rate will decrease. So this is the process. So in order to this, for this vapor pressure, to this photosynthesis to not decrease as a result of the reduced stomatal conductance, we have equations that will help in finding out this optimum value. What is the stomatal conductance or the opening of the stomata, so that photosynthesis is also optimum, whereas transpiration is also not too high. So we have a bunch of equations that help us in finding out what is the correct stomatal conductance when the transpiration is not too high, whereas the photosynthesis is not too low. So we can say from this vapor pressure deficit that okay. Yeah. So from this vapor pressure deficit, we can say that when high VPD, the transpiration is going to increase. T will be high, and at low VPD, T will be low. At high VPD, GS will be low, and at low VPD, GS will be high. That is, the stomata will be more open in when the transpiration is low, and when the transpiration is very high, the stomata will be closed. So this is what the vapor pressure deficit does to the stomata. In order to control the transpiration process, if the vapor pressure deficit is very high, the stomata will close, and then this is in turn going to affect the photosynthetic process. So to establish the relationship between this vapor pressure deficit, there are four quantities in play here. We have transpiration, we have photosynthesis, we have relative humidity, as well as the carbon dioxide concentration. All these four quantities are going to interact with each other so that the processes can happen in an optimum manner. So in order to bring a relationship between these four quantities, there are some equations that are developed as models, or equations that are developed, which will help us in getting the correct rate of stomatal conductance with all these processes happening in an optimum level.